Some fathers find out their son is getting married from a stranger holding a champagne flute. I found out mine was getting married from a woman I'd never met, standing in a kitchen I helped pay for, telling me I was interrupting. It feels like standing in your own driveway at midnight, staring at a phone that refuses to ring, absolutely certain your daughter is lying in a hospital bed somewhere in Texas with nobody to call you. That was me. 63 years old, gripping a cordless phone so hard my hand cramped, waiting on two grown children who couldn't be bothered to send 4 words. My name is Walter Reese. Folks around here call me Walt. I spent 31 years running Reese and Sons millwork out of a converted barn, 12 minutes outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania cabinets, custom staircases, the kind of work you do with your hands until your hands don't work the same way anymore. I built that business from a table saw and a bank loan my own father co-signed, back when he still could. He died the year I turned 9. Heart gave out in a hayfield, and nobody got to him in time. I grew up watching my mother count pennies at the kitchen table, and I swore, standing at his graveside in a borrowed tie, that any children I had would never once wonder if their father was coming home. I kept that promise for 34 years. Then, on a gray Wednesday in April, that promise turned into the worst week of my life. Welcome back to the channel, and thank you, truly, for being here, whether you're a longtime neighbor of this story or just stopping by for the first time. Stick around, because the people you're about to meet had every chance in the world to do right by an old man. They chose something else entirely. If you'd tell me where you're tuning in from tonight, I'd be grateful to hear it. It started with a certified letter, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you've even opened the envelope. Property tax reassessment. My name was still attached as co-owner on my daughter Renee's house, the one I'd helped her put a down payment on 4 years back when she and her husband split and she needed a fresh start in Charlotte. The letter needed a signature verifying the mortgage was current before the county would finalize the new valuation. Simple enough. One phone call, 10 minutes, done. I dialed her from the shop, leaning against the workbench, sawdust still on my forearms. Straight to voicemail. Figured she was at work. She managed a dental office, always had her phone tucked in a drawer during appointments. I left a message. Hey Bug, it's Dad. Got a letter from the county about the house. Need you to call me back when you get a minute. Nothing urgent. Went back to sanding a walnut tabletop and didn't think another thing of it. Next afternoon, nothing. Called again. Voicemail again. Now, Renee doesn't always pick up right away. She's got 2 kids and a job that keeps her running, but she calls back by supper. Always has. So I called my son, Curtis, figuring he'd at least know if his sister was traveling for work. Curtis lives 40 minutes from her, out past Concord, sells commercial insurance, the kind of job where he's got his phone glued to his hip. Voicemail. Both of them, same day. I told myself it was nothing. Kids get busy. My wife Dot noticed something was wrong with me that night before I'd said a word. 40 years of marriage will do that. She can read a change in my shoulders before I feel it myself. You've barely touched your dinner, she said, nodding at the pot roast going cold on my plate. What's going on with you, Walt? Neither one of them is answering, I said. Since yesterday morning. She waved it off, same as I'd tried to. They're grown, Walt. They've got their own lives. She was right. I knew she was right. So why did I feel sick to my stomach all through the 11 o'clock news? Day 3 is when it stopped being annoying and started being something else. I called Renee 9 times. Called Curtis 6. Every single one died in a voicemail box that never filled up because nobody was even listening to the ones already sitting there. I stopped eating right. Stopped sleeping right. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a car folded around a guardrail on I-85. I saw 2 state troopers standing on my porch with their hats in their hands, and I swear I could hear the words before they ever said them. I'd already buried my father too young. I knew exactly how fast this world could reach in and take somebody. Quiet and sudden, with no warning at all. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed at 1:30 in the morning, thumb hovering over Renee's name in my contacts for what felt like the 100th time. Dot sat up behind me. Come to bed, Walt. Something's wrong, Dorothy, I said, and my voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard from myself since we lowered my own mother into the ground. 3 days, neither one of them. That is not normal for either of my children. Maybe they're together. Maybe something happened with their phones. Both phones? Both kids? 3 straight days? I looked at her, and watched it land on her face, the same way it had landed on mine, that same cold drop clean through the stomach. "Pack a bag," I said. "We're driving down there. Something is wrong. I can feel it in my chest." She didn't argue. 40 years teaches you which fights are worth having and which ones you just get up and pack a bag for. We left before sunrise, took turns behind the wheel of the F-150, 11 hours down through Virginia and into North Carolina, with the radio off the whole way, because neither of us had it in us for music. Dot kept saying the same thing on a loop, trying to talk herself into believing it. "They're fine, Walt. There's probably some boring explanation." "Then why won't either one of them pick up a phone?" I said, hands tight on the wheel. 9 calls, 6 calls. Not one text back. Not one. She went quiet after that. I think some part of her already knew. The same way some part of me already knew. That boring explanation wasn't waiting for us at the end of that drive. Renee's house came up on us just past 4 in the afternoon, tucked into a nice cul-de-sac in a neighborhood that hadn't existed 10 years ago, the kind with matching mailboxes and a community pool. I remember thinking it looked too pretty, too quiet, for whatever this was. I pulled the truck up along the curb behind a line of cars I didn't recognize, and my hands were actually shaking when I put it in park. 34 years of fatherhood, and I was walking up somebody's front walk like a man about to identify a body. And that's when I heard it. Music. Laughter. Loud and easy, spilling out through the screen door. Balloons tied to the porch railing, white and gold, bobbing every time the door opened and closed. That is not the sound of tragedy, I thought, and for half a second relief hit me so hard my knees nearly went. Thank God. Thank God they're all right. I knocked. The laughter dipped. Footsteps. The door swung open, and there stood my daughter, wine glass in one hand, a smile that froze halfway between surprise and something a good deal colder. I hadn't seen that particular look on her face since she was 16, and I'd caught her sneaking back in after curfew. That smile didn't stay confused for long. It curdled. "Dad. Mom. What are you doing here? Not, are you okay? Not, is everything all right? What are you doing here?" Like Dot and I were two strangers selling something off a clipboard. I tried to keep my voice steady, though my chest felt like it was folding in on itself. "I've been calling you for 3 days, Renee. You didn't answer. Neither did your brother. I thought something happened to one of you." Dot pushed past me a step, hand flying to her mouth, 20 years of motherhood pouring out of her all at once. "Oh, thank God. Baby, you're okay. We were sick. We were absolutely sick with worry." Renee cut her off before she'd even finished. She rolled her eyes. A full, dramatic, exhausted roll, the kind you give a telemarketer who calls back a third time. "We didn't answer because we didn't want to deal with this right now." Her voice came out flat, sharp, final. "Stop calling us so much, Dad. We have our own lives. You're smothering us. Just stay on your own side for once." 4 words at the end there. Stay on your own side. I've taken a lot of hits in my life, a table saw kickback that took 2 stitches out of my forearm, my own father's absence for 54 years running, and none of it landed the way those 4 words landed. Right there, on a porch, with balloons bobbing behind my daughter's head like the whole neighborhood was in on the joke. Before I could find a single word, my son Curtis stepped up beside her, a beer in his hand, and behind him a woman I didn't recognize, holding a clipboard of all things, like she was running the whole event. "Oh good, the show's here," Curtis said, not even looking at me directly. Then the woman with the clipboard spoke up, chin lifted, that particular tone people use when they've decided you're beneath explaining things to. "I'm Marissa," she said. "I'm coordinating Renee's engagement party. And I have to say, unannounced guests really aren't part of the plan today." Renee raised her left hand. Slow, deliberate, showing off a ring that caught the porch light and threw it right back in our faces. Engaged. Our daughter, engaged, and Dot and I found out, standing on a stranger's front walk, being told we were unannounced. I want to pause and tell you something about myself, because it matters for everything that came after. I didn't yell. I've turned that over in my mind 100 times since whether I should have raised my voice right then, whether some part of them needed to see me break the way they'd just broken their mother. But that's not who I am. And it's not who my own father raised me to be. Not that he got much time to raise me at all. So I stood there, and I asked the only question I had left in me. How does a father go from calling because he loves you to smothering you without one single conversation in between? I found out fast enough. Curtis set his beer down on the porch rail, hard. You want to know why we didn't answer? We saw your calls, Dad. Both of us. We talked about it. We decided not to pick up, on purpose, to see how long it'd take you to finally get the hint. Purposefully. Not, we were busy. Not our phones died. On purpose, the two of them, watching my name light up their screens, while I sat home imagining car wrecks and hospital rooms, deciding together to let their own father suffer as some kind of lesson. Dot made it 2 steps before her hand went to her mouth again, and this time, nothing came out at all. I reached over and took her hand, and we turned around and walked back to that truck without another word. While behind us, I heard the woman with the clipboard mutter something to Renee, and the music start back up, like nothing at all had happened on that porch. The drive to the motel that night was the quietest 3 miles of my life, and I've sat through some quiet ones. Dot stared out the window, tears running steady and silent down her face, the kind of crying that doesn't make a sound. She finally spoke somewhere around the second red light. 15 years, she said quietly. 15 years. I kept my mother's brooch wrapped in tissue paper in my jewelry box, waiting for the day Renee got engaged, so I could pin it on her the way my mother pinned it on me. I didn't ask which brooch. I already knew. I pictured telling her the story behind it. She went on, voice cracking clean in half. Not finding out from a stranger with a clipboard, not being told I was unannounced. I reached over and took her hand off her lap and held it the rest of the way, and neither one of us said another word until we were lying in that motel bed staring at a water stain on the ceiling. We drove home the next morning, 11 hours back up through the same stretch of highway, and somewhere around the Virginia line something shifted in my chest, quiet but permanent, like a door closing somewhere deep in a house you thought you knew every room of. I gave those 2 kids everything I never had growing up. Every ball game, every scraped knee, every dollar I could spare, and plenty I couldn't. And somehow, in giving them all of that, I'd raised 2 grown adults who looked at their own mother like she was an inconvenience standing on a porch. 34 years, and that was the return. We got back to the house a little after 9 that night, and the quiet inside hit different than it ever had before. Dot made it into the living room, right onto the rug her own grandmother had hooked by hand 70 years back, and her knees just went out from under her. She went down onto that rug and cried the way you cry when somebody dies, not the composed, hallway kind of crying, but the real thing, from somewhere underneath the ribs. I got down on the floor with her, didn't try to fix a single thing, which, if you know me at all, is a small miracle in itself, because fixing things is the only language I've ever really spoken fluently. I just held her, and I let myself ask the question that had been chasing me the whole drive home. Where did we go wrong, Dot? I gave them everything I never had. She lifted her head, eyes swollen near shut, and said the only thing that made a lick of sense that whole night. No, Walt, you didn't turn them into anything. They did that themselves. You just handed them a life they never once had to work for. And people who never work for something don't ever learn to be grateful for it. We didn't sleep much. We talked instead, the real kind of talking that 40 years of marriage lets you do without needing to explain half of it out loud. We agreed on one thing above everything else. Whatever came next, we'd move on it together. No solo decisions, no guilt trips at 3 in the morning that would soften either one of us at the wrong moment. By the time the sun came up, we were of one mind. And Walter Reese, aligned with his wife, is not a man you want standing between you and a telephone. I called my attorney, Harold Beckett, at 8 o'clock sharp the next morning. Man's handled every piece of paper for Reese & Sons for 22 years. He knows my business voice from my something else voice, and this was clearly something else. Walt, he said, you sound like a man who didn't sleep. I need you to pull my name off Renee's mortgage as co-owner, I said. Today, if the paperwork allows it. There was a pause on the line, the kind a good lawyer gives you when he wants to be sure you're not about to do something you'll regret come Friday. You understand, once you're off that deed, the equity split changes. And if she can't refinance solo at her income, the bank could call the note current. I understand it fine. I said. I've never been surer of anything in my life. He didn't push back further. By that afternoon, the paperwork was filed to remove me from the deed and, more to the point, from the second mortgage I'd co-signed to help her afford the place at all. I didn't stop there. Curtis had a small business loan for his half of a hunting cabin up near Asheville, secured against a piece of equipment financing tied to my company's assets, a favor I'd extended 2 years back without a second thought. I called our bank and formally revoked that collateral arrangement. The loan officer told me flatly that without my company backing it, the loan would be flagged for review inside 30 days. I didn't do any of it out of spite. I just let the banks do what banks do and looked at what my children actually stood on once my name stopped holding it up. I didn't hear a word from either of them for 11 days, which, given everything, felt almost peaceful. The same silence that had nearly broken me 2 weeks earlier now felt like the first real rest I'd had in months. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I was out in the shop finishing a set of stair spindles for a job over in Millersville when my phone lit up with Renee's name. I let it ring twice before I answered. Dad. Her voice came out tight, cracking at the edges, a woman trying hard to sound calm and losing that fight in real time. Dad, there's something wrong with the house paperwork. The bank says I'm not going to qualify for the refinance on my own, and if I can't, they're saying the note could come due. What did you do? I withdrew from the deed, I said, keeping my voice level, almost gentle. Same as you asked me to. Stay on my own side, you said. So I am. Dead silence on the line. Then, Dad, why would you do that? You know I can't refinance a loan right now, not with the kids' daycare and everything else. If this note gets called, I could lose the house. It wasn't a mistake, Renee. I'll talk to you soon. I hung up. They didn't wait around to find out how bad it would get. Word came to me later, secondhand, through Dot's sister, who still lives down that way, Renee scrambling to find a private lender, coming up short, finally selling the house at a loss, just to get out from under it before the bank forced the issue. Packed 4 years of her life into a moving truck in under a week, and moved into an apartment complex on the far side of town, the kind with a chain-link fence around the pool. Curtis's situation unwound, slower, but just as sure. Once the collateral backing dried up, his loan officer called the note in for review, and without my company standing behind it, Curtis couldn't produce enough on his own credit to satisfy the bank. He lost his share of the cabin to his business partner, who bought him out for a fraction of what he'd put in. They showed up on my porch about a month later, together, which told me right off they'd been talking. Curtis was the one who knocked, hard and fast, like the door owed him something. I opened it, sat them down at the kitchen table, the same table where Dot had taught them both long division, and let them say whatever they'd driven 3.5 hours to say. Renee went first, crying before she'd even sat all the way down. Real tears, I'll grant her that. Though it took me a minute to remember, real tears don't automatically mean real accountability. How could you do this to us? Her voice broke on nearly every word. We're your family, Dad. I could have lost my kids' home over this. Small argument, I said, my own voice entirely empty of anything. That's what your brother called it that day on the porch. You watched your mother and me call for 3 days straight while we sat home sick with worry, and the two of you decided, together, to let us suffer to teach me a lesson. Now the world's teaching you one instead. Curtis's face shifted from grief into something uglier, a kind of cornered panic. You're just punishing us because we finally stood up to you, he said, voice rising. You've always needed to feel like the hero. You can't stand that we don't need you hovering over every part of our lives. I didn't flinch. I don't want to see either one of you fail, I said. But you told me you didn't need me hovering, acting like a hero. I'm only honoring what you asked for. If you truly don't need me, then you don't need my name on your deed, and you don't need my company's collateral backing your loan. That's not punishment. That's adulthood, same as you demanded. Renee's jaw tightened, and I watched her search for another angle, the way a man pats his pockets for keys he already knows he left inside. Mom would never have let you do this, she said, pivoting hard, desperate now. You're doing this behind her back, aren't you? You're bitter, and you're taking it out on us. That's when Dot stepped in from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, voice steadier than I'd heard it since that porch in Charlotte. Your father and I are on the same page, she said. We talked about every bit of this together. We agreed to honor what you both asked for. Curtis, who'd gone quiet, finally cracked. Mom, You can't be serious. I stood up, walked over, put my hand gently on Dot's shoulder. So here we are, I said. You wanted your own lives. You've got them now. Good luck to the both of you. I watched something in their faces, finally understand, really understand, that this wasn't a bluff, wasn't a father who'd fold the second. His children cried hard enough at his own kitchen table. They left that night without another word between us. I heard 2 car doors slam out front, heard the engines fade down the road, and Dot and I stood in that kitchen in a silence that, for the first time in a month, didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like something closer to peace. I went back to see Harold the following week, and this time it wasn't about a deed. I want to rewrite the will, I told him, sliding my coffee aside to make room for the folder he'd brought. Completely. He looked up at me over his glasses, the same careful look he'd given me the day I asked him to pull my name off Renee's mortgage. How completely, Walt? If I go first, everything to Dot. If she goes first, everything to me. And if we're both gone, I stopped. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something settle in my chest instead of tearing through it. Not $1 to Renee or Curtis. It goes to the Veterans Children's Scholarship Fund out of the county, the one that helps kids whose fathers didn't come home from deployment. Kids who'd give about anything for a father to call them once and mean it. Harold didn't ask me to reconsider. He just nodded, made his note, and got to work. My own father was taken from me in a hayfield when I was 9 years old, and I spent my whole life trying to become the man he never got the chance to be. Somewhere along the way, in giving my children everything I never had, I raised 2 adults who took a living, breathing father completely for granted. They don't need my money. They've made that plenty clear. But there are children out there right now, real children, growing up the way I did, who would trade almost anything for a father worth calling. That's where my legacy is going instead. Months passed. The calls from Renee and Curtis slowed down to almost nothing, then stopped. I heard through Dot's sister that Renee was still in that apartment with the chain link fence, and Curtis had moved back in with a roommate, no cabin, no equity, learning the hard way what a paycheck looks like when your father's name isn't standing behind it. I won't sit here and tell you it doesn't sting some nights, because it does. But every time that ache creeps back up on me, I remember that porch. I remember stay on your own side. I remember Dot's face when that woman with the clipboard called us, unannounced, and the ache settles right back down where it belongs. Dot and I sit out on our back porch most evenings now, right around sundown, coffee going cold in our hands, watching the light fade out over the same yard where 2 kids once learned to ride bikes. I stayed up half the night assembling in this very shop. She reached over one evening not too long ago and put her hand on mine, the way she's done more times than either of us could ever count across 40 years. My father died when I was 9. I spent a lifetime trying to be the man he never got to become for me. But somewhere along the way, I nearly forgot that the only person I truly needed to protect was sitting right there beside me the whole time. My children have their own lives now. They made that plenty clear, standing on a porch in Charlotte with balloons bobbing over their heads. My wife and I, we've got each other. And it turns out that's more than enough to build the rest of a life on. If this one hit close to home for you, I'd be glad to hear where you're watching from tonight. Take care of the people sitting right beside you. I'll see you next time.